Welcome to the Coach and Crew Show. I'm your host, Charlie Krause, and today we are going to be interviewing a good friend of the program, Steve Hiegel, who runs the website justcollegebasketball.net. You can also follow him. He's very active on Twitter, amongst other things, at Steve Hiegel. And Steve keeps up pretty intimately with basketball throughout. So we're going to pick his brain for a couple of minutes and get everybody up to speed on what's going on, almost big picture, and just through his observations. So, Steve, I want to start with this. Well, first off, obviously, welcome officially. But I'm looking at the top 25, and in the world of college football, you'd expect to hear this, but the SEC has 6 of the top 25 schools. That's the most this season at the current moment. So we'll put that big asterisk out there. Last year was the Big 12 that ran away with it. This year, it looks like SEC's the front runner. What's your take on that? And just in general, what's your take on the SEC's basketball so far this season?
It's amazing how far it's come. You know, you think when you said SEC has 6 teams in the top 25, you think you just made a mistake and said ACC, but that's apparently not the case this year. ACC only has Duke in the top 25. Yeah, it's a great conference this year. It's not just a football conference anymore, as those have said in the last several years. A lot of good teams, a lot of good basketball. And I think some of the teams that aren't in the top 25, you know, can definitely make a case. A few of their teams that are right outside of the top 25 and having good seasons. So it's going to be a heck of an SEC tournament. A lot of people were clamoring for Auburn to be number 1 this week. I can see Gonzaga still being number 1. But Auburn plays Kentucky on Saturday. That's going to be a huge game. I saw a few minutes of the LSU Alabama game last night. So a lot of good teams, a lot of good basketball. So it's going to be a great SEC tournament this year. Yeah, I wish I was going. So
well, Tampa's, I'm sure, drooling over that opportunity. You mentioned Duke, and we'll just jump around in random order. This is obviously Coach K's farewell tour. How do you think that's going? And then, not that you're some expert meteorologist who can forecast, but is Duke going to still be Duke next year, or is Duke going to hit the reality bar like every other blue blood school is and maybe take a step backwards? How do you think that's going to go with the transition?
I think the transition will be fine because John Shire's been there for a long time, at least in the first couple years. Everybody says, well, he's been recruiting all these players, and he has, and he's continued. They have a great class coming in next year. I believe it's number 2 in the country. It might be number 1 for the recruiting class for next season. I think they're having a great season this year. I see them as a really good team this year toward the end. I don't see them as a Final Four team. I see them as probably like an Elite 8 team. But I think the transition will be fine, at least for the first couple of years, as he's getting his feet wet, because he's still gotten the influx of good players coming in. Then it's all going to come down to his first couple of seasons, how well he does coaching, how the team does. And then sometimes you can see the program regress at that point. But it'll take a couple of seasons for that to take place. And he's off to a great start. Like I said, he's got an incredible recruiting class coming in next year, and he's got the vibe with the players because he's the one that's been recruiting for the last half a dozen years, if not longer, for Coach K, the lead recruiter. So it'll be interesting to see, though, how it goes forward. A lot's going to depend on next season. This season, no matter how well they do or not, this is Coach K's last season. But next season, his first season as coach, because it's one thing to, I always say, it's one thing to recruit the players. You still got to coach them up to play. So that's what you're going to find out next season when he's sitting in the quote unquote the big chair.
So I shared with you my observation of what I'm viewing as the number 1 storyline of the year so far is the SEC's made the jump to the top. What do you see as the biggest storylines thus far? And we're roughly past halfway point, almost into the 2/3 parts of the regular season.
Yeah, one storyline I'm seeing, it's been talked about by several experts out there and analysts. It's definitely correct in the fact that how far the WCC has come, Gonzaga's conference, and how much better it's gotten. I mean, they might get as many, if not more, bids than the ACC in the 2022 NCAA tournament. You could also make the case for the Mountain West coming just as far. Both those conferences out west have gotten so much better in the last half a dozen years. It's amazing. Wow, the ACC, of course, this season has definitely regressed and it's taken a step back. I mean, 15 teams, but I think the ACC is lucky if they get 5 NCAA tournament bids. I don't even think they're going to get that many, depending on how it goes down the stretch. It's definitely, I mean, when I was growing up, it was all, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and it was all ACC all the time, and it was just a great conference. And now I think maybe a little bit of the problem with the conference is there's too many teams now. I mean, that's not really an excuse, but it's definitely some of the marquee teams are having down years. And it's just definitely, I think the storyline this year is going to be interesting to see as February goes through in early March when the tournament's seeding is done. Can the WCC, how many teams they get in the tournament as well as the Mountain West Conference? I think that's one of the big storylines this year.
Let me sidebar and ask you this as a follow-up. You're in Baltimore. I'm in Richmond. There is this phrase that's been used throughout time called East Coast bias. You just mentioned two different West Coast school programs who the average game doesn't start till after 10 p.m. Eastern, maybe even 11. Do you think that they could be suffering from East Coast bias come selection time? So a middle tier ACC school gets a step in or a step bump over those the Mountain West, and then a school like possibly San Francisco.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I can definitely see that because, I mean, anyone who follows the sport and doesn't stay up till the wee hours of the night might never see a team like San Francisco play, or even one of the better Mountain West Conference teams during the season if all their games start late at night. Now, you can catch some of their games on the weekend, like late afternoon or early evening, of course. But yeah, I can definitely see that. And then, of course, the ACC is front and center on, most cable subscribers have the ACC network, or if the games aren't on the ACC network, they're on ESPN all the time. So you're pretty much seeing all the ACC teams front and center on a nightly basis throughout the season. So I definitely can see East Coast bias and saying somebody who sees Syracuse makes a run in the ACC tournament, or, one of the teams that's kind of on the bubble. Like right now, I think Miami would be in the tournament. They've been one of the higher teams, but any of the blue blood, like North Carolina, who's having a good season, but not a great season, could definitely get a bid over a West Coast Conference team or Mountain West Conference team when push comes to shove, just because of that name recognition and is right there on their jerseys.
We're chatting with Steve Hiegel of justcollegebasketball.net, and you can follow me on Twitter at Steve Hiegel. All right. I know who San Francisco is. I can find them on a map. I know their team colors. I actually know their nickname. They're the Dons. Thank you very much. But I can't tell you the first thing about them. I don't want to include Gonzaga into this conversation because, unfortunately, I don't think they deserve to be this conversation anymore. Everybody loves the underdogs come March. Everybody loves the mid-majors. Who are some schools out there? I'm assuming you're going to say San Francisco is possibly one. That are some mid-majors now that we can start following and hopefully root for come March.
I'd say one would be, of course, they're well known now, but they're having another great season. It's Loyola Chicago. They only have a couple losses this season, both the top 25 teams. They have a bunch of seniors on that team. The only player they lost, I believe, from last year was the center, Cameron Krutwig. He could have come back for a fifth year, but opted not to. I'd say definitely put them on your map. I also see, I've seen a lot because I'm right in the footprint of the CAA conference. And I think whoever wins that conference could be a really tough out for a team seeded like 3 to 5 in the NCAA tournament, because that'll probably be like a 12 to 14 seed, whoever wins that conference tournament. And there's some really good teams in that conference. They had several big upsets earlier in the season. Towson had a couple of good upsets. College of Charleston did. That conference always produces good basketball, and you see a lot of those players will transfer up at the end of the season to some Power 5 teams, as well as higher mid-majors, or like the Conference USA or Atlantic 10. And I think that conference is sort of like a sleeping giant, and we'll see come tournament time who wins that tournament. But every year, whoever wins that tournament, they get to the NCAA tournament. I don't know if they've won in the past, 5 to 10 years, that team, but they've always given whoever they played a really good game. Another one I can make example too is the Patriot League. There's some local teams. It's more East Coast based dominant league, but Mid-Atlantic league, but and they have their own. There's a lot of.
Bucknell's always been one of those schools you always circle, or Lehigh. It's always been.
And whoever wins that conference, I can pretty much say the same thing. That conference is a little different, where that conference tournament is played on the home courts of the teams that are the higher seeds. So once you get to the championship game, if you're the higher seed, you play the game on your home court. You win, you get to the NCAA tournament. A couple years ago, Colgate, I believe gave a game to Tennessee. It might have been more tournament before COVID, I believe. But anyway, that conference always produces a really good team that is a tough out as like a 14 seed, maybe 15 seed in the NCAA tournament. And that's another one I'd watch out for as well.
Let's go one more question to leave it at this, and I think it's the most predictable question everybody asks. You're allowed to change it from your initial one, but right now, if the tournament started today, who would you have as your Final Four?
You know what? I'll say the same Final Four I said at the beginning. Why not? So I don't know. This has been a crazy season in college basketball, and it'll continue to be that way, I'm sure, for the rest of the season. So I don't have as much faith as I had in my Final Four at the beginning, but I had Villanova, who I still have a lot of faith in. Purdue, who I have a lot of faith in. North Carolina, who I'm shaking a little bit on that one. And the fourth one is Texas, who I can't figure out because they have the talent, but they're just not playing that well this season. I mean, Baylor's playing really well in the Big 12, Kansas, and even Iowa State, but just Texas. I don't know. Chris Beard came there. I thought they would. Maybe it'll take him a couple years, but he had some good transfers come in. He had a couple guys that are upperclassmen stay around, and they just something chemistry wise, they're just not gelling there. And I think their record is like something like 15-4, but all their losses are at the top 25. They haven't beaten anybody that's in the top 25. They're just beating everybody else. So they have to turn that around and quickly as we get into February.
Well, the beauty of college basketball is sometimes the crazy saying, okay, North Carolina, who earlier you just said might be even a bubble school, but yet you still have them in the Final Four. That could be realistic. So
you
here
never
you are
know.
talking with one hand and then coming out the other hand as well. So
you never know. You never know as February plays out in early March, the teams that gain traction toward the end, those are the tough teams to beat come tournament time. You're always going to have a couple of the teams in the higher that have been ranked up in the top 10 all season, like of course Gonzaga. And this might be Gonzaga's, I don't want to say best chance, but one of the best chances. The fact that tough schedule they played early on, losing to Alabama, losing to Duke, those games are going to help them in the long run. I mean, they're going to be a tough out. And of course, a lot is determined too by just the seeding itself. You never know who's going to be in the bracket. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, until that selection Sunday where it's like that, you look at the bracket sometimes like, man, where some teams are just like, even if they're hot and they're playing well, they just get a terrible draw. And you're just like, man, there's no way we're going to get past the Sweet 16.
Hey, we could easily see a Baylor versus Gonzaga in the Elite Eight just coming out of the West region.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that's what happens sometimes. You just get that bad draw, and and you always, like my dad always said, it's like you always need like the team in front of you to upset the higher seeded team at least once or twice. So you get a little bit lucky. You kind of get an easy game instead of a team that you think, okay, we're going to end up playing Villanova, and then they get upset and you're playing like whoever beat Villanova, like a mid-major team, and then you can beat them even if it's a close game. So, I mean, look at NC State in 1983. There's the best example. They just went through and they came up at the end of every game and just won. And
you don't have to beat every team. You just have to beat who's ever in front of you. In
front of you, yep. And you got to beat them one. You got to beat them one time. That's another thing too. People always forget. It's not the best of 7 in the NBA. It's just one game. You got to beat them on a neutral, mostly neutral court. So.
Check out Steve on Twitter at Steve Hiegel. Go to his website, justcollegebasketball.net. Steve, always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this edition of the Coach and Crew Show. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we hope you enjoy all of our videos. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the little bell in the corner to get all of our notifications. You can click on our logo as well to subscribe to it. And if you really like it, share it with your friends, and please leave a comment. Thank you for watching.